first video in this chapter, we got to the point where the French and Indian War began, when George Washington led a group of Virginians into the Ohio River Valley and began fighting with the French. Now, the French and Indian War, which runs from 1754 to 1763, we can talk about it in three different phases. In the initial stage, which was from 1954 to 1966, it was a local conflict, meaning that there was the colonists fighting. Britain wasn't really involved. There was the colonists versus the French and the Indians. The great Indian Native American power in the area, the Iroquois, stayed out of the war altogether. But most of the other tribes allied with France. The Native Americans began raiding the western fringe of British settlement, and the colonists pulled back east of the Allegheny Mountains, back into kind of the original colonial territory. In this first phase of the war, the colonists were clearly losing. Things were not going well for them. Now, in the second phase of the war, which runs from about 1756 to 1758, the British are going to come over and take over the battle against the Native Americans and the French. The war will also spread during this period into the Caribbean, India, and Europe as well. And so it becomes really kind of a world war between the French and the British. And the Prime Minister of Britain, Pitt, who Pittsburgh's named after, will send the British Army to America to fight against the French and the Native Americans. They will impress the colonists. I don't mean the colonists thought they were neat. I mean they would force colonial men into service in the military against their will. They would also seize supplies instead of paying for them. They might go to a store and just take the things they need, or show up at a farm and just take the crops in order to supply the army without paying for them. And so what happens here is in this war that was started by the colonists and in the beginning was fought by the colonists, there's going to be a lot of tension between the British Army and the colonials, and that's really going to hinder the war effort. The colonials will hide goods from the British because they don't want them to get taken. And so again, in the second phase, the war is not going really very well for the British. Now, in the third phase, and this is a nice little life lesson, which goes from 1758 to 1760, we enter into a period of cooperation. Pitt, the Prime Minister of England, begins paying the colonists for supplies and even reimbursing supplies that had been taken. He also began asking the different colonial assemblies to recruit troops for him instead of just forcing American troops into combat. They also increased the number of British troops in the colonies. And it is in this third phase that the British and the colonists began winning the war against the French and the Native Americans. The French, by the way, of course, are crippled by their small numbers. There's very few actual French people here. And so they're really dependent upon the Native Americans. But they also have a few years where they have bad harvests, and so they begin to run really low on supplies. Probably the most dramatic moment of this war is July of 1758, when two British generals, Amherst and Wolfe, attack a French fortress at Quebec. They invade Canada, and then in 1759 they attack a fortress at Quebec, which you see here. The fortress is built on a cliff, and the British surprised the French by scaling the cliff and attacking from behind, which they had thought was safe. It's a notable battle because it's one of the few battles in world history where both commanding officers are killed. By September 1960, the French surrender, and the British and the colonists have won the French and Indian War. The war will officially end in 1763 with the Treaty of Paris. Paris was a popular place to write treaties, as we're going to see. In the treaty, France gives Canada to Great Britain. They also give all their land east of the Mississippi, so that pink area there you see on the map. And they also give some of their Caribbean possessions as well as parts of India. Now, they do pull a little tricky move here. Right before the treaty is signed, they give this yellow area here that says Louisiana, they give that to Spain. Spain is their ally. Spain doesn't really like Britain. And the idea is they're going to give it to Spain, then go sign the treaty, and then Spain will at a later date give it back to France. And they do this so to avoid losing that territory in the treaty to end the war. Now, this sounds like it's great news for Britain because they gain all this territory, and that is good for Britain. But they're also massively in debt. Remember, Britain has been basically in a constant state of warfare since 1688 in the Glorious Revolution. And they're broke. And the people of England blame the colonists for the war itself and for the debt. They're mad at the colonists for resisting enlistment. Remember, they had to force them into the military. And for expecting to be paid for supplies. They felt like the colonists started the war, so they should gladly supply the British Army. It also turns out that Southerners had been going to the Caribbean and selling supplies to the French, which made the English very happy. Of course, the Southerners didn't really see them as the colonies as one united thing, so they probably didn't even see that as particularly bad. They also blamed the colonists' military ineptitude, which is largely George Washington, for the war going so poorly in the beginning, and they also blamed the colonists for starting the war. And so there begins to grow a demand in England for keeping a closer rein or having more control over the colonies. Now, in the colonies, they have for the first time ever united in a common cause to fight against the French and the Native Americans, and they begin to resent Great Britain's increased involvement in being blamed for the war. The Native American tribes in the Ohio River Valley are broken by the war. They'll never recover. And Great Britain is angry at the Iroquois, the great Native American power in the area, for being so passive, for not getting more directly involved in the war. And in fact, the area that's fought over here will be essentially devoid of Native Americans over the next 15 years, or by the end of 15 years.